You can tell a lot about people by how quiet they get when they finally realize who's been sitting across from them. The smell of burnt coffee and overheated printer toner hit me before I even opened the HOA meeting room door. Tuesday night. 7:14 p.m. Willow Creek Estates Clubhouse. Same fake stone walls. Same patriotic flag hanging crooked beside the budget reports. Same polished oak table where Claire Holloway liked to sit at the head like she'd been elected governor instead of HOA president. I could already hear her voice through the door, sharp and rehearsed, cutting through the room like a box cutter through cardboard. "Run everything again," she snapped. "I want every record this man has." The moment I stepped inside, the room went still for half a second before people started pretending not to stare. You know the look suburban neighborhoods get when they decide someone doesn't belong? Tight smiles. Folded arms. Coffee cups frozen halfway to their mouths. I'd seen it before. Claire sat perfectly upright in a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her silver bracelet tapped lightly against a thick manila folder sitting in front of her. My folder. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the friendly kind. It was the kind people use when they think they already won. "Mr. Reeves," she said sweetly, "thank you for finally attending one of our community hearings." Hearing. That word almost made me laugh. I'd lived in Willow Creek for 8 months. Paid my dues early every quarter. Kept my lawn trimmed to exactly 3 inches because apparently that mattered here. I waved at neighbors. Fixed my own gutters. Stayed quiet. But quiet makes certain people nervous. Especially people like Claire Holloway. She leaned forward slightly, perfume drifting across the table. Expensive floral mixed with stale coffee and printer heat. "We've had concerns raised regarding your background," she continued. "Several residents feel transparency is important in a neighborhood like this." Neighborhood like this. There it was. I glanced around the room. Nobody met my eyes. One board member kept adjusting his tie like it was strangling him. Another woman suddenly became fascinated with the papers in front of her. Claire slid the folder toward the center of the table with one manicured finger. "You didn't disclose prior federal employment on your residency paperwork." Her smile widened just a little. "We found that interesting." Outside, rain tapped softly against the clubhouse windows. Somewhere near the back hallway, an old air conditioning vent rattled like loose change in a dryer. I pulled out my chair slowly and sat down without saying a word. That seemed to irritate her more than if I'd argued. "Mr. Reeves," she pressed, "would you care to explain why your records are partially sealed?" There was that word again. Sealed. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Claire opened the folder. Paper rustled. Then came silence. Real silence. The heavy kind that settles over a room right before people realize they've made a terrible mistake. One board member stopped breathing through his mouth so suddenly I actually heard it. Another leaned closer to the pages, then immediately leaned back again. Claire's expression didn't change at first. But her fingers tightened around the paper hard enough for her knuckles to lose color. The air suddenly felt colder inside that room. Nobody looked at me anymore. They were all staring at the file. Page after page after page. Federal case numbers. Financial fraud investigations. County subpoenas. Property seizure reports. Names highlighted in yellow marker. Company records. Contractor licenses. Bank transfers. I watched Claire's eyes move faster with every page she turned. Then they stopped completely. Right there near the bottom corner of page 6. Because sitting inside that sealed attachment was a contractor name connected to Willow Creek Estates itself. And underneath it was my signature. Claire shut the file so fast the metal clasp snapped loud enough to echo off the clubhouse walls. Nobody moved. The old fluorescent lights above us hummed softly while rainwater slid down the windows in crooked lines. I could smell wet asphalt drifting in every time the air conditioner kicked on. Claire cleared her throat once, then again, trying to recover whatever authority she thought she still had left. "This meeting is adjourned," she said quietly. Not one person argued. Chairs scraped backward across the hardwood floor as board members grabbed their papers without looking at each other. One older guy named Dennis nearly dropped his coffee mug because his hands were shaking so badly. I stayed seated while the room emptied around me. Claire avoided my eyes completely. That part interested me most. 20 minutes earlier, she could barely stop talking. Now she looked like she wanted the entire building to disappear around her. She stuffed the folder back together too quickly, papers crooked and hanging out the side. The polished confidence she carried like armor all year long had cracks in it now. Tiny ones? But enough. Outside, thunder rolled low over Willow Creek Estates as I walked back toward my truck. The neighborhood looked almost fake in the rain. Perfect sidewalks. Matching lanterns. Fresh mulch around every mailbox. The kind of place where people believed expensive landscaping could hide ugly behavior. Water dripped from the brim of my ball cap while I unlocked the driver door. Across the street, somebody peeked through their blinds and immediately closed them when I looked up. That started happening more after the meeting. People suddenly remembered appointments whenever I walked by. Golf carts turned corners early. Conversation stopped mid-sentence near the community pool. Fear changes a neighborhood fast. Especially when money is involved. I drove home slowly past rows of oversized houses glowing warm against the stormy sky. Most of Willow Creek smelled like cut grass and chlorine this time of year, but near the east entrance you could always catch the sharp chemical scent from the landscaping storage lot. That was where Ridgeline Property Services kept their equipment. Ridgeline. The same contractor name sitting on page 6 of Claire's precious file review. Funny how people panic when paperwork starts connecting itself. My garage door groaned open as headlights spilled across my workbench. The familiar smell of machine oil, cedar wood, and lake water settled something inside me immediately. Half-finished boat parts covered one side of the garage beside stacks of labeled storage bins. Most people probably saw an old fishing boat getting restored piece by piece. What they did not see was how years in federal financial investigations trained you to notice patterns everywhere. Missing numbers. Inflated invoices. Duplicate billing addresses. Tiny cracks inside systems that people assume nobody will ever inspect closely. I loosened my jacket and set my keys beside an old radio while rain hammered harder against the roof. My phone buzzed twice on the workbench. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Voicemail notification. I pressed speaker. Mr. Reeves, this is Allison from the Willow Creek Accounting Office. Claire has requested temporary suspension of all pending violations against your property until further review. Her voice sounded nervous. Like someone reading a hostage statement. I almost smiled. Temporary suspension. 6 weeks earlier, they fined me $200 because my trailer hitch extended 11 inches beyond driveway guidelines. 2 weeks before that, Claire personally measured my lawn with a ruler while wearing white tennis shoes that probably never touched dirt before moving into this neighborhood. But now suddenly they wanted further review. Rainwater rattled through the gutter outside while I opened one of the gray storage bins near the back wall. Inside sat 12 years of archived investigation records sealed in thick plastic sleeves. Property fraud. Procurement kickbacks. County corruption. I slid one folder halfway out before stopping on a familiar name printed across the tab in black marker. Ridgeline Property Services. Same contractor. Same billing pattern. Same shell structure. Different county. I stared at it for a long moment, while thunder rolled again outside. Then I heard tires crunch slowly across my gravel driveway. The headlights stopped halfway down my driveway, washing pale yellow light across the rain-soaked gravel and the side of my garage. I stayed where I was, one hand resting on the edge of the storage bin, while the storm rattled against the roof hard enough to shake dust loose from the rafters. Whoever sat inside that SUV left the engine running for nearly 30 seconds before the driver door finally opened. Claire Holloway stepped out holding a black umbrella against the rain. That alone told me how nervous she was. Claire normally traveled with an audience. Board members. Realtors. Her little circle of neighborhood loyalists wearing tennis skirts and carrying wine tumblers like political staffers. But tonight she came alone. Water splashed softly under her heels as she walked toward the garage. She hesitated when she saw the investigation folders stacked on the workbench beside the old radio. The smell of wet pavement and machine oil drifted through the air between us. "You keep late hours," she said carefully. Her voice sounded different now. Less polished. Less certain. I closed the storage bin slowly. "You measured my grass at 6:30 in the morning once," I replied. "Seems unfair to criticize my schedule." She forced a tight smile that disappeared almost instantly. Thunder rolled somewhere over the lake behind the subdivision. Claire glanced at the open folder tabs again. Ridgeline Property Services. County Procurement Division. Financial Asset Review. Her eyes moved away quickly after reading the labels. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said. There it was. The first stage of panic. People always start with misunderstanding. Not mistake. Not corruption. Never that. Just misunderstanding. I leaned against the workbench while rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the roof outside. Interesting word choice. Claire adjusted her umbrella handle with both hands. Tiny movement. Nervous tell. The board was only conducting standard due diligence. By pulling sealed federal records? Her silence answered faster than words could. The storm wind pushed rain sideways through the garage opening, carrying the sharp scent of cedar mulch from somewhere down the street. Claire looked smaller standing there now. Not physically. Just stripped of the artificial authority she wore around the neighborhood like jewelry. "Nathan," she said quietly, "if there are concerns regarding certain vendors connected to Willow Creek, I am sure we can address them internally." Internally. Another favorite word from people trying desperately to avoid outside investigators. I reached over and turned off the buzzing fluorescent work light above the bench. The garage dimmed instantly except for the soft glow from the overhead bulbs near the boat trailer. Claire stiffened slightly at the sudden darkness. "You know what the problem is with people who abuse small power?" I asked. "Eventually they forget what real oversight looks like." Rain hammered against the driveway hard enough now to blur the streetlights at the end of the cul-de-sac. Claire swallowed once before speaking again. "Nobody on the board knew those records existed. But somebody knew enough to search for them." That landed exactly where I intended. Her eyes shifted away for half a second. That was enough. Years investigating procurement fraud taught me something useful. People rarely confess with words first. They confess with timing. With breathing. With silence. Claire stepped closer to the garage opening, lowering her voice. "If this is about Ridgeline, those contracts were approved before I became president." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because innocent people do not walk into a storm at nearly 10 o'clock at night to explain contracts nobody accused them of yet. My phone buzzed again on the workbench. This time the caller ID displayed a county office number from 2 counties south. Claire noticed it too. The color drained slightly from her face. I let the phone ring 3 full times before answering. "Nathan Reeves speaking." A calm voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Reeves, this is Investigator Harold Bennett with the County Financial Compliance Division. We need to discuss Willow Creek Estates and a contractor named Ridgeline Property Services. We were told you might already have relevant files." Claire stopped breathing for just a second. And in my line of work, 1 second is all you need. Claire stared at the phone on my workbench like it had just started speaking another language. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her umbrella onto the concrete floor in slow, steady taps while Investigator Bennett continued talking through the speaker. We reopened. 3 contractor audits this afternoon, he said calmly. Your name surfaced in archived procurement reports connected to Ridgeline. We would appreciate your cooperation. I kept my eyes on Claire the entire time. I might have some files, I answered. Depends what exactly you are looking for. Claire shifted her weight slightly. Her expensive heels scraped faintly against the concrete. Tiny sound. Nervous sound. False billing structures, Bennett said. Maintenance inflation. Duplicate vendor payments routed through secondary holding companies. He paused for half a second. And possibly kickbacks tied to residential association contracts. There it was. The real word finally entering the room. Kickbacks. Not misunderstandings. Not accounting errors. Claire's face stayed controlled, but her breathing changed again. Faster now. Shallower. I had seen that same reaction in conference rooms, county offices, and federal hearings for over a decade. People can rehearse confidence. What they cannot rehearse is the moment they realize paperwork already knows the truth. I can stop by your office tomorrow morning, I said. 8 o'clock work? Perfect, Bennett replied. And Mr. Reeves? Yeah? You may want to bring everything. The line clicked dead. Outside, lightning flashed across the subdivision lake bright enough to light the garage walls blue for a split second. Claire lowered the umbrella slowly. Nathan, she said carefully, you need to understand something before this gets out of control. I almost smiled hearing that phrase. Out of control. Funny thing for an HOA president to say after spending 8 months trying to control every mailbox, driveway, and lawn chair in the neighborhood. You already lost control, I replied quietly. The wind outside carried the smell of wet pine trees and fresh mulch through the garage opening. Somewhere farther down the block, a dog barked once before going silent again. Claire folded her arms tightly across her chest. Ridgeline handles landscaping contracts for half the county, she said. If there are irregularities, they could affect hundreds of homeowners. There it was again. Deflection disguised as concern. She still thought she could manage the situation if she sounded responsible enough. Interesting, I said. You suddenly care about homeowners. Her jaw tightened immediately. For a second the old Claire surfaced again. The neighborhood queen. The woman who walked around with violation notices tucked under her arm like parking tickets from heaven. You think you are smarter than everyone here because you worked for the government, she snapped softly. No, I answered. I think people get careless when they believe nobody is watching. Silence settled between us except for rain hammering against the driveway. Claire looked toward the stack of archived folders near my workbench again. Her eyes lingered on one label longer than the others. Willow Creek Reserve Expansion. That got my attention immediately. She noticed me noticing. Small mistake. But enough. That one seems familiar, I said. Claire looked away too quickly. Another mistake. I should go, she muttered. She turned toward the driveway, but I spoke before she reached the rain. Claire. She stopped. How long have you known Ridgeline was recycling contracts through shell companies? She stood completely still for a moment. Rain hissed against the gravel outside while thunder rolled low across the subdivision. Then she answered without turning around. Long enough to know people disappear socially in neighborhoods like this for asking the wrong questions. After she drove away, I stayed in the garage listening to the storm for nearly 10 minutes. My old radio crackled softly with static beside the boat trailer, while water dripped steadily from the roof gutters outside. Then I pulled the Willow Creek Reserve Expansion folder from the stack and laid it across the workbench. The paper smelled old and slightly damp from storage. Inside sat invoices, vendor maps, contractor transfers, and one photograph clipped to the corner of a procurement summary. Claire Holloway standing beside a Ridgeline executive at a charity golf tournament 3 years earlier. Both smiling directly at the camera. And written across the bottom in faded blue ink were 4 words that made my stomach tighten instantly. Phase 2 approved. Unanimously. The next morning smelled like wet grass, diesel exhaust, and panic. You can actually smell panic sometimes. It hangs in the air different when an entire neighborhood realizes something ugly might crawl out from underneath all the expensive landscaping and fake smiles. By 7:30, Willow Creek Estates was already buzzing harder than a hornet nest. Golf carts rolled slowly down the streets carrying retirees pretending to take morning drives, while obviously scanning driveways for gossip. Curtains twitched every time my truck passed by. The security guard at the front gate suddenly stood straighter when he saw me approach, like somebody had warned him overnight not to make eye contact too long. Funny how fast power shifts in places like this. 2 weeks ago I was the suspicious outsider with the old fishing boat and the quiet house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Now people looked at me the way townspeople stare at a storm cloud rolling over the horizon. I parked outside the county compliance building at exactly 7:58. Same ugly tan brick exterior I remembered from a dozen government offices across 3 states. The smell inside hit me immediately after walking through the glass doors. Burnt coffee. Copy paper. Industrial floor cleaner. Bureaucracy has smelled exactly the same everywhere since about 1987. Investigator Harold Bennett met me near the elevators holding a legal pad and a paper cup that looked one sip away from collapse. Mid-50s. Gray tie. Tired eyes. The kind of man who spent 20 years reading numbers nobody else wanted to understand. "Mr. Reeves," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Appreciate you coming in. You sounded concerned on the phone." Bennett gave a dry laugh. "Concerned usually means paperwork errors. This feels more expensive." He led me into a small conference room where 2 county auditors already sat surrounded by stacks of invoices and highlighted spreadsheets. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed softly while rainwater still tapped against the narrow windows outside. I set my archive box onto the table carefully. Nobody spoke for a second after reading the labels on the folders. Then one auditor, younger guy named Collins, opened the Ridgeline file and immediately frowned. "You kept all this?" he asked. "You learn not to throw things away in my line of work." Bennett flipped through contractor summaries while the room slowly filled with the dry, rustling sound of paper moving faster and faster. Every few seconds somebody stopped on a page and circled something silently. Duplicate billing addresses. Matching account numbers. Landscaping invoices charging $600 for shrubs that cost $90 at retail. It was all there. Same pattern. Different county. Different neighborhood. Same scam wearing different clothes. Collins leaned back in his chair eventually, and rubbed both hands over his face. "Jesus," he muttered softly. "These people build the association for retaining wall repairs that never existed." Bennett looked toward me carefully. "You said you saw this before?" I nodded once. "4 years ago in Jefferson County. Smaller scale, though. Back then, Ridgeline only targeted retirement communities." "How much did they take?" one auditor asked. I glanced toward the spreadsheets spread across the table. "Enough to buy silence." Nobody laughed. Because everybody in that room understood exactly what that meant. Bennett opened another folder slowly. Willow Creek Reserve Expansion. Claire's photograph slid halfway loose from the paperwork before he caught it with 2 fingers. His eyes narrowed instantly. "That is your HOA president, Claire Holloway." He stared at the image for a long moment. Claire smiling beside the Ridgeline executive at the charity golf tournament. Champagne glasses raised. Sunset behind them. Comfortable. Familiar. Not the kind of picture people take with contractors they barely know. Bennett slid the photograph into a clear evidence sleeve without another word. The room grew quieter after that. He reached for his phone finally and stepped into the hallway. Through the glass wall I watched him speak in low, calm sentences while 3 different people on the other end apparently started talking all at once. When he returned, his face looked flatter somehow. More official. "Nathan," he said carefully, "how many people inside Willow Creek know this investigation exists?" "Right now," I answered. "Probably the entire neighborhood." Bennett exhaled slowly through his nose. "Then Claire Holloway is either preparing lawyers." He glanced toward the evidence sleeve holding her photograph. "Or preparing to disappear socially before subpoenas start landing." Then somebody knocked softly on the conference room door. The county receptionist looked nervous standing there. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "there is a woman downstairs asking if she can make a statement before attorneys get involved." Bennett looked at me immediately. He did not even need to ask the name. Claire Holloway looked nothing like the woman who used to patrol Willow Creek in white tennis skirts handing out violation notices like party invitations. By the time Bennett escorted her into the conference room downstairs, the storm outside had turned the county building windows dark gray, and every ounce of suburban confidence she normally carried seemed washed out with the rain. Her hair was slightly out of place. Her makeup looked rushed. Even her posture had changed. Smaller somehow. She walked into the room holding a leather folder against her chest with both hands like it might stop the walls from closing in. The smell of rainwater and expensive perfume drifted in behind her. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody smiled. Bennett closed the conference room door carefully and motioned toward the empty chair across from me. Claire froze for half a second when she realized I was still there. "I did not know he would be present," she said quietly. Bennett sat down at the head of the table. "You requested to make a statement before legal counsel became necessary. Mr. Reeves is part of this investigation now." The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while Claire lowered herself into the chair. She avoided looking directly at the evidence sleeve holding her golf tournament photograph beside the Ridgeline executive. Her fingers tightened around the leather folder again. "I wanted on record that I never personally authorized fraudulent billing," she began carefully. There it was. Another sentence innocent people almost never use first. Bennett folded his hands together calmly. "Interesting choice of wording, Mrs. Holloway. We did not accuse you of fraud yet." Claire swallowed hard enough for me to hear it across the table. Outside the room, somebody pushed a squeaky mail cart down the hallway. The sound echoed faintly through the glass walls before fading away again. "Ridgeline approached the HOA board 3 years ago," Claire said. "They offered discounted maintenance contracts if we approved expansion projects through preferred vendors." Bennett flipped open his legal pad. "And did the board know those vendors were connected through shell corporations?" "No. Too fast. Too automatic." Bennett noticed it too. "How long have you known?" he asked. Claire stared down at the table for several seconds before answering. "About 14 months. Silence settled over the room again. Heavy silence. The kind that tells you somebody just crossed a line they cannot uncross. I leaned back slightly in my chair while rain tapped against the narrow windows behind us. "That was around the time Willow Creek started issuing emergency assessment fees," I said. Claire looked at me sharply. "You have no idea what that board is like," she snapped suddenly. "Those people wanted property values climbing every quarter no matter what it cost." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Bennett kept writing without reacting. "So Ridgeline inflated invoices and the board approved them anyway?" Claire laughed once under her breath. Bitter sound. "The board approved anything that kept home prices rising. Nobody asks questions when their house gains $50,000 in value." There it was. The truth finally crawling into daylight. Not greed alone. Vanity. Ego. Status. The entire neighborhood had built itself around the illusion of perfection, while money leaked quietly through maintenance contracts nobody bothered reading. Claire opened the leather folder slowly and slid several documents across the table. Internal emails. Vendor approvals. Payment summaries. Bennett's expression flattened more with every page he read. "You kept copies," he said. "I started keeping records after they tried pushing me out too. That got my attention immediately." Claire looked exhausted suddenly. "Not scared anymore. Just tired. 2 months ago the board voted to replace me," she said quietly. "Apparently I knew too much about where the money was going." The room went still again except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Bennett stopped writing completely. "Who pushed for your removal?" Claire hesitated. Then she reached into the folder one last time and slid a printed HOA board roster across the table. 3 names had been circled in red ink. One of them made my stomach tighten immediately. Dennis Harper. The same board member whose hands shook during the clubhouse meeting. Claire finally looked directly at me for the first time all morning. "Nathan," she said quietly, "you were never the target." Rain rolled harder against the windows as she pointed at the circled names. You moved into Willow Creek right when they realized someone from your old division was living inside the neighborhood. The room felt colder after Claire said that. Not physically colder. The air conditioner still rattled overhead. Rain still streaked down the windows outside. But something shifted inside my chest hearing those words. You were never the target. I stared at the 3 circled names on the board roster, while old instincts started connecting dots faster than I wanted them to. Dennis Harper. Melissa Kane. Richard Blevins. All senior board members. All heavily involved in Willow Creek expansion contracts over the past 2 years. And suddenly every strange interaction I had experienced since moving into the neighborhood replayed differently in my head. The repeated requests for my employment history. The fake concern over community transparency. The board insisting on background disclosures nobody else had to provide. They were not trying to remove a troublesome resident. They were trying to figure out exactly how dangerous I might become if I noticed them. Bennett leaned forward slowly. Explain that statement carefully, Mrs. Holloway. Claire rubbed both hands against the sides of her coffee cup even though the drink had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. Dennis recognized Nathan's name during residency approval, she admitted quietly. He used to work with county procurement offices before joining the HOA board. My jaw tightened slightly. And he connected my name to federal investigations. Claire nodded once. At first they thought it was coincidence. Then Melissa searched archived case records and found references to your testimony in the Jefferson County fraud trials. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, while Bennett wrote notes across 3 separate pages now. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody needed to. The story was finally telling itself. So the violation started after that, I said. Claire looked down at the table. Dennis believed if they pressured you enough, you would either move away or keep your head down. I almost laughed hearing that. Pressure. These people thought mailbox citations and landscaping fines counted as pressure. They had no idea what real investigations felt like. Bennett flipped through another stack of invoices while Collins highlighted vendor transfers beside him. You said they became nervous after Nathan moved into Willow Creek, Bennett said. Why? Claire hesitated too long before answering. That was never a good sign. Because Ridgeline was preparing Phase 2. The words settled heavily into the room. I reached toward the evidence folder beside me and pulled out the expansion proposal again. New retaining walls. Pool renovations. Security upgrades. Nearly $4 million in projected construction contracts. $4 million. Suddenly the fake violations against my property made perfect sense. They could not risk somebody with my background casually reviewing HOA financial records once Phase 2 money started moving. Claire finally looked directly at me again. The emergency hearing last week was supposed to scare you, she admitted softly. Dennis wanted the board to vote on legal action against your property before county auditors noticed the invoices. Bennett stopped writing completely at that point. Legal action based on fabricated violations? Claire nodded slowly. The room went silent except for rain tapping against the glass. Then Bennett leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath through his nose. That changes this significantly. Outside the conference room, phones started ringing somewhere deeper inside the county offices. Fast. One after another. Through the hallway window I noticed 2 additional investigators walking quickly toward Bennett's department carrying file boxes and laptops. News travels fast once financial crimes start touching property records. Collins suddenly looked up from the spreadsheets. You need to see this. He rotated his monitor toward us. A series of payment transfers filled the screen. Ridgeline routed maintenance funds through 3 shell companies before portions landed inside private consulting accounts connected to Willow Creek board members. Dennis Harper's name appeared twice. Melissa Kane's appeared 4 times. But the last account froze everybody in the room completely. Richard Blevins Consulting Group. Bennett frowned immediately. Richard Blevins? Claire closed her eyes briefly like somebody fighting a migraine. He is not just on the HOA board, she said quietly. He sits on the county zoning committee. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. Because now this was no longer just neighborhood corruption. Now county officials were connected too. Bennett reached for his phone immediately. "Nobody leaves Willow Creek until we secure financial records," he said sharply. Then he looked directly at me. "Nathan, if these people targeted you because of your old division background," he glanced toward the payment transfers again, "they were a lot more afraid of you than they ever admitted." I looked out through the rain-streaked windows toward the parking lot below where county vehicles were already starting to pull in faster than normal. And for the first time since moving into Willow Creek Estates, I finally understood why the entire neighborhood went quiet the moment they opened my file. By late afternoon, Willow Creek Estates looked less like a luxury subdivision and more like a company under audit. County vehicles lined both sides of the clubhouse parking lot with windshield wipers slapping steadily against the rain. Men in gray jackets carried file boxes through the front doors while nervous. Homeowners gathered under covered porches pretending not to stare. The entire neighborhood had gone unnaturally quiet. No leaf blowers. No kids riding bikes. No golf carts cruising slowly past mailboxes. Just rainwater running through storm drains and the distant hum of generators near the maintenance shed. Fear has a sound when it spreads through wealthy neighborhoods. It sounds like silence. I parked near the clubhouse around 4:30 and stepped out into cold damp air carrying the sharp smell of soaked mulch and fresh-cut cedar. The same clubhouse where Claire once lectured people about mailbox paint shades now had county auditors photographing computer towers and collecting accounting records into evidence bins. Through the glass entrance doors I could see Dennis Harper standing near the reception desk arguing with two investigators while sweat darkened the collar of his blue polo shirt. He looked 20 years older than he had during the board meeting. Funny what subpoenas do to a man. The moment Dennis saw me walking toward the building, his face tightened instantly. He stopped talking mid-sentence. One investigator noticed and glanced back toward me. "Mr. Reeves?" she said with a polite nod. "Timing could not be better." Dennis wiped both palms against his pants before forcing a weak smile that collapsed halfway through. "Nathan," he said carefully, "I think this whole thing has gotten wildly out of proportion." Out of proportion. Another phrase corrupt people love once paperwork catches up to them. I stopped a few feet away while rain tapped softly against the clubhouse windows behind us. "You searched my background before I even moved in," I said calmly. Dennis tried laughing but no sound came out. "Standard residency review procedures." The investigator beside him raised an eyebrow immediately. "Your HOA conducts federal background searches on incoming residents?" Dennis realized his mistake too late. His mouth opened slightly before shutting again. Sweat rolled slowly down the side of his face despite the cold air inside the lobby. I had seen suspects unravel slower in interrogation rooms. "We were protecting property values," he muttered. "No, I answered quietly. "You were protecting contracts." That landed harder than yelling ever could. Dennis looked away first. Always watch who breaks eye contact when money gets mentioned. Around us, county staff moved through the clubhouse carrying accounting ledgers, archived laptops, and storage drives sealed inside evidence bags. Every few seconds another resident entered the lobby demanding explanations from whoever still looked important enough to blame. Nobody from the HOA board had answers anymore. Their little kingdom built on landscaping rules and violation letters was collapsing under receipts and transfer records. Claire sat alone near the back conference room wearing the same cream-colored blazer from the meeting 2 nights earlier. Except now it looked wrinkled and exhausted. Like her. She stared out the rain-streaked windows while investigators reviewed documents beside her. When she noticed me, she gave a small tired nod. Not friendship. Not forgiveness. Just recognition between two people who finally understood how rotten the system had become underneath all the polished sidewalks and decorative fountains. Collins walked over carrying another stack of files under one arm. "You were right about Phase 2, he said quietly. "They plan to inflate security infrastructure costs by almost $1.8 million. He handed me a spreadsheet showing duplicated contractor invoices highlighted in red. "Security gates. pool renovations, drainage upgrades. Most of the companies barely existed outside post office boxes and shell registrations. How bad? I asked. Collins gave a humorless laugh. Bad enough the county zoning office just suspended 3 permit approvals tied to Willow Creek projects. Across the lobby, Dennis suddenly raised his voice at one of the auditors. You cannot freeze community funds without board authorization. Bennett stepped into a hallway right then, holding a thick legal document folder beneath his arm. Calm expression. Flat voice. The dangerous kind of calm government investigators get once everything they suspected turns out true. Actually, Bennett said, we already did. The entire lobby went silent again. Even the rain outside seemed quieter somehow. Bennett handed Dennis a formal notice packet, while another investigator disconnected the HOA administrative server behind the front desk. Dennis read the first page and physically sagged against the counter. Effective immediately, Bennett continued. All Willow Creek Estates financial operations are suspended pending county review. Residents standing nearby started whispering immediately. Somebody dropped a coffee cup near the vending machines. Claire closed her eyes briefly but said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say anymore. The neighborhood that once tried digging through my past had just watched its own secrets get hauled out the front door inside evidence boxes. 3 weeks later, the fountains at the Willow Creek entrance stopped running. Somebody shut them off after the county froze the HOA operating accounts, and without the constant sound of water and machinery humming beneath the stonework, the neighborhood felt strangely honest for the first time since I moved there. No more polished illusion. No more fake perfection floating on top of hidden invoices and quiet kickbacks. Just empty sidewalks, wet leaves gathering near curbs, and residents suddenly forced to talk to each other without an HOA board translating everything through fines and violations. Early October air carried the smell of cedar smoke and cold rain through the subdivision that morning while I worked inside my garage with the door half open. The old fishing boat sat under warm overhead lights, half sanded and covered in fresh epoxy near the bow. My radio crackled softly beside a coffee mug gone cold 2 hours earlier. Peaceful. Finally peaceful. I tightened a bracket near the trailer hitch while sunlight filtered weakly through gray clouds outside. Across the street, old Mrs. Patterson walked her golden retriever slower than usual. She waved carefully when she saw me. Funny thing was, people waved now. Real waves too. Not those tight little suburban gestures people make when they are scared their neighbors might lower property values by existing too loudly. A lot changed after the county investigation became public. Dennis Harper resigned from the HOA board 48 hours after financial records surfaced online through county filings. Melissa Kane hired attorneys and vanished from every community meeting afterward. Richard Blevins stepped down from the zoning committee. For personal reasons. Which is government language for somebody found paperwork they could not explain. Ridgeline Property Services lost county contracts across 3 districts within 10 days. Turns out fraud spreads fast when nobody stops it early. So does accountability once somebody finally does. Claire Holloway moved out quietly the previous weekend. No dramatic scene. No moving trucks during daylight. Just a black SUV at dawn and a realtor sign appearing in her yard 3 hours later. The cream-colored house near the golf course sat empty now with fallen leaves collecting against the driveway she used to inspect for parking violations every Saturday morning. I thought I would feel satisfied seeing it abandoned. But honestly, I mostly felt tired. People like Claire always think power belongs to whoever talks the loudest in the room. They never understand real power usually sits quietly in the corner, taking notes. My phone buzzed softly on the workbench while I wiped sawdust from my hands. Message from Bennett. County Grand Jury approved formal investigations this morning. Appreciate your help. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking the phone again. Outside, a light breeze pushed through the subdivision carrying the smell of damp grass and chimney smoke from somewhere near the lake. No sirens. No arguments. No board meetings. Just silence. Actual silence this time. Not fear. Not tension. Just peace settling back over a neighborhood that forgot what peace sounded like after years of control and greed disguised as community standards. Around noon, somebody knocked lightly against the open garage frame. I looked up to find one of the younger homeowners standing there holding a folded lawn chair under one arm. Guy named Eric. Mid-30s. Usually kept to himself. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Couple of us are grilling by the lake later if you want to stop by." I almost smiled hearing that. 3 months ago. Nobody in Willow Creek even wanted to stand near my driveway. "Maybe," I answered. Eric nodded once before glancing toward the old boat behind me. "You know," he said quietly, "everybody thought you were hiding something when you moved here." I picked up the wrench again and tightened one last bolt until the metal clicked solid into place. "I was," I replied. He looked confused. "What?" I set the wrench down beside the radio, while sunlight reflected softly across the polished edge of the boat hull. "Patience," I said calmly. Eric laughed once under his breath before heading back across the street. I watched him go for a second while leaves scraped softly along the curb outside. Then I leaned against the workbench listening to the neighborhood settle into quiet around me. Funny thing about Willow Creek Estates. In the end, nobody got destroyed by threats. Nobody got destroyed by shouting. They destroyed themselves the second they opened my file and realized the man they spent months investigating had spent most of his life investigating people exactly like them.